Okay, I'm about to absolutely destroy your childhood. But hear me out. What if I told you that Beauty and the Beast isn't a love story? What if it's actually the most successful case of Stockholm Syndrome ever put on screen, and Disney gaslit an entire generation into thinking toxic relationships are romantic? I know what you're thinking. Not another person ruining Disney movies. But listen, after rewatching this as an adult with functioning brain cells, I realized something wild. Belle isn't the strong, independent princess we thought she was. She's literally the poster child for Stockholm Syndrome, and we've been calling it true love for 30 years. So buckle up, because we're about to dive deeper into this mess. And by the end of this video, you'll never look at that famous ballroom scene the same way again. Before we get into it, let me just say, I'm not trying to completely destroy your childhood memories. I'm just saying maybe we need to talk about how Disney took a story about captivity and somehow made us all think it was romantic. So let's break this down, character by character. Let's start with our leading lady. Belle walks into this story as the different girl in town, the one who reads books and thinks she's intellectually superior to everyone else. Disney painted her as this symbol of independence and intelligence. But here's the tea. Belle's character arc is a textbook case of Stockholm Syndrome. And Disney dressed it up with pretty dresses and singing furniture to make us think it was empowerment. Think about it. Belle starts off as a prisoner, literally. She didn't choose to be there. She was taken against her will and locked in a castle by a literal monster who threatened her father. That's not the beginning of a love story, that's the beginning of a hostage situation. But here's where it gets dark. Instead of maintaining her initial fear and resistance, Belle gradually starts making excuses for the Beast's behavior. She goes from "this is terrifying" to "well, he's not that bad once you get to know him," and finally to "actually, he's misunderstood and I can fix him." And Disney made this psychological manipulation look romantic by adding a gorgeous library, some fancy dresses, and that iconic ballroom scene. They literally said, "Here's Stockholm Syndrome, but make it aesthetic." And we all just accepted it. The most messed up part? Belle becomes the perfect example of what psychologists call trauma bonding. She forms an emotional connection with her captor as a survival mechanism, but the movie tells us it's true love. That's not character development. That's psychological conditioning with a Disney filter. Now let's talk about the Beast, aka the most successfully rebranded abuser in cinematic history. Disney's version tells us he's just a misunderstood prince who needs love to break his curse. But if we strip away the fairy tale makeup, what we have is a textbook example of an abusive relationship pattern. The Beast starts this story by literally kidnapping an old man and then trading him for his daughter. That's not romantic, that's human trafficking. But somehow Disney convinced us this was the setup for a love story. Then we get the classic abuser playbook. Rage, violence, intimidation, followed by gifts and apologies. The Beast screams at Belle, destroys furniture, has violent outbursts, but then, plot twist, he gives her a library, and suddenly he's husband material. The most dangerous part is how Disney frames the Beast's character development. He doesn't actually work on himself, go to therapy, or do any real personal growth. He just gets nicer because the plot demands it. That's not redemption. That's script writing convenience. In real life, abusers don't magically transform because someone loves them hard enough. But Disney sold us this fantasy that if you just stick it out, if you show enough patience and understanding, your abuser will eventually become Prince Charming. And here's the kicker. The Beast only changes when he's literally about to lose everything. Not because he realizes his behavior is wrong, but because his curse is about to become permanent. That's not love-driven transformation, that's panic-driven damage control. Let's talk about Gaston, the character Disney set up as the obvious bad guy so we'd miss the real problems. Gaston is portrayed as this cartoonishly masculine, ego-driven hunter. But here's what's interesting. Gaston is literally just the voice of Belle's entire community. The whole town thinks Belle is weird for reading, and the whole town thinks Gaston would be a perfect husband for her. Gaston is Disney's scapegoat. They made him so obviously terrible that we'd focus all our hatred on him and ignore the fact that Belle's entire society is the real problem. He's the distraction villain while the real issue, systemic sexism and small-minded communities, gets a free pass. And here's the really messed up part. When you put Gaston next to the beast, Gaston actually respects Belle's right to say no. Yeah, he's annoying and persistent, but he's not literally kidnapping and imprisoning her. The bar is so low it's underground, but technically, Gaston is less of a criminal than our supposed hero. I'm not saying Gaston is a good guy, but it's wild how Disney made us hate the guy who takes no for an answer more than the guy who won't let Belle leave. Alright, let's get serious for a minute and talk about what Stockholm Syndrome actually is. It's a psychological phenomenon where hostages develop positive feelings toward their captors as a survival mechanism. The victim starts to identify with and even defend their captor. The symptoms include positive feelings toward the captor, Belle defending the beast, negative feelings toward law enforcement, Belle opposing the townspeople trying to rescue her, and a belief in the captor's humanity. He's not a monster, he's just misunderstood. The most insidious part is how Disney romanticized this psychological survival mechanism. They took a trauma response and dressed it up as the ultimate love story. Belle doesn't fall in love with the beast, despite being his prisoner. She falls in love with him because she's his prisoner, and her brain is trying to cope with an impossible situation. And the movie reinforces this by showing us that Belle's feelings are rewarded. She gets beautiful dresses, a massive library, and eventually, the beast transforms into a handsome prince. The message is clear. If you develop feelings for your captor, you'll be rewarded with a fairy tale ending. Let's talk about the setting. Disney took what is essentially a prison and made it look like the most beautiful, magical place on Earth. But strip away the enchantment, and what do you have? A place where Belle cannot leave and is completely cut off from the outside world. The castle has all the hallmarks of isolation tactics used by abusers: geographic isolation, restricted communication, a controlled environment, and dependency creation. The library scene is particularly manipulative. The beast gives Belle access to books, and we're supposed to see this as romantic. But you know what would be more romantic? Not imprisoning her in the first place. And let's talk about those enchanted objects. They're literally Stockholm Syndrome enablers. They spend the entire movie convincing Belle that the beast is actually wonderful. Mrs. Potts, Lumiere, and Cogsworth are basically running a PR campaign for the beast, making his prison look fun and his abuse look forgivable. The original Beauty and the Beast wasn't the sanitized love story Disney sold us. The older versions of this tale were much darker, more complex, and actually dealt with the psychological implications of the situation. In earlier versions, Belle's psychological journey was portrayed as genuinely disturbing rather than romantic. The story acknowledged that developing feelings for your captor isn't healthy or normal. The original tales were cautionary stories about power, control, and the psychological effects of captivity. They were warnings, not romance manuals. But Disney took those warnings and turned them into wedding inspiration. Let's talk about the most iconic scene in the movie: the ballroom dance. This is the moment that's supposed to represent true love blooming, but if you really think about it, this scene is actually the culmination of Belle's Stockholm Syndrome journey. By this point in the movie, Belle has completely internalized her captivity. She's not just accepting her situation anymore. She's actively participating in the fantasy that this is a love story rather than a hostage situation. And Disney made it absolutely gorgeous. The animation, the music, the lighting, everything is designed to make us forget that this is a victim bonding with her captor. The lyrics are particularly telling. Tale as old as time, barely even friends, then somebody bends unexpectedly. That's not describing love. That's describing psychological manipulation. Someone bends because they've been broken down and rebuilt to accept an unacceptable situation. One of the most common defenses of this movie is that Belle chooses to stay, that she develops agency and makes her own decisions. But let's examine what choice really means in the context of captivity. Belle's choices throughout the movie: choosing to stay instead of her father, coercion; choosing to have dinner with the beast, survival; choosing to tend to the beast's wounds, trauma bonding; and choosing to return to save the beast, Stockholm Syndrome. None of these are actually free choices. They're decisions made under extreme psychological pressure. The movie frames Belle's return to save the beast as the ultimate romantic gesture. She chooses love over freedom. But psychologically, this makes perfect sense as the final stage of Stockholm Syndrome. The victim becomes so bonded to their captor that they can't imagine life without them. Belle returns because her psychological conditioning is complete. The climax of the movie is the beast's transformation from monster to prince. This is supposed to be the moment that validates everything. But let's think about what this transformation actually represents. The beast's physical transformation is immediate. But where's the psychological transformation? Where's the character growth? The magic literally erases all consequences of his behavior. The transformation scene teaches us that love can literally change people's fundamental nature.
Oh, that's
that if you just stick it out long enough with someone who hurts you, they'll eventually become everything you wanted them to be. But here's what's really messed up. The beast only transforms after Belle says she loves him. Her Stockholm Syndrome has to be complete before he gets his reward. So what did Beauty and the Beast actually teach an entire generation of viewers? If someone kidnaps you, they might just be misunderstood. Violent outbursts are forgivable if followed by nice gestures. You can fix someone with enough love and patience. Developing feelings for your captor is romantic, not traumatic. Disney took every warning sign of an abusive relationship and rebranded them as romantic plot points. They created a generation of people who think they can love someone into changing. So after all this analysis, is Belle a tragic victim of Stockholm Syndrome, or is she the CEO of her own drama, someone who actively participated in creating this toxic dynamic? The truth is probably somewhere in between. Belle is both a victim of psychological manipulation and someone who, once conditioned, became an active participant in perpetuating the dynamic. That's how Stockholm Syndrome works. Victims become complicit in their own captivity as a survival mechanism. After breaking down every element of this story, here's what we're left with. Beauty and the Beast isn't a love story. It's a psychological thriller that Disney successfully marketed as the greatest romance ever told. They took Stockholm Syndrome, wrapped it in beautiful animation, added catchy songs, and convinced the entire world that this was what true love looks like. I'm not trying to say you can't enjoy this movie. Art can be problematic and still have value. The beautiful animation, incredible music, and nostalgic memories are all still valid. What I am saying is that we need to be honest about what we're actually looking at. So, are we going to keep celebrating Stockholm Syndrome as the greatest love story ever told? Or are we going to start having more honest conversations about what healthy love actually looks like? Real love doesn't kidnap you and call it romance. Real love doesn't isolate you and call it protection. Real love doesn't break you down and call it transformation. Real love sets you free. So that's my take. But I want to know what you think. Are you Team Belle found true love? Or Team Belle is the CEO of Stockholm Syndrome? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want me to psychoanalyze other Disney couples, let me know which ones you want to see next. Thanks for sticking with me. And remember, question everything, even your favorite childhood movies. Sometimes the most beautiful stories are hiding the darkest truths.